Welcome to Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A. I'm your host, Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to this week's episode where we tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center ecosystem, including data center operators like colocation, hyperscale, edge, modular, wholesale data center providers, as well as the dozens of different kinds of data center technology companies and facilities related companies, data center construction, real estate and investment companies, and of course, the vibrant outsourced sales and marketing company that works within data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities. And this weekly show, Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A, is for you regardless of where you sit on the go-to-market team. Perhaps you work in some facet of sales, like as an account executive, an AE, or an SDR or BDR, a sales development or business development rep. Maybe you work in post-sales, like as an account manager or client success, or perhaps you're in some facet of marketing, like digital marketing, content, event, field, social media marketing, demand generation, or product marketing. And speaking of product, maybe you work as a product manager or on some kind of innovation role within your company. Or perhaps your company has both a direct and an indirect playbook where you have a channel partner ecosystem that's growing with like managed service providers and value-added resellers and integrators and agents and other third-party channel partners. Or perhaps you are the one who's responsible for figuring out your company's big picture growth strategy, the executive sponsor of all of this, who goes out into the marketplace to recruit the best and the brightest to your team and make sure that everyone is sitting in the right seats on the bus, rowing the boat at just the right speed, playing their musical instruments at the right volume, at the right tempo, at the perfect timing to orchestrate this magnificent period of global growth within all things data center, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities. If this is the first time that you're joining us for Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A, welcome. We're thrilled to have you with us. Let us know in the comments wherever you're watching us from, what do you do in the data center industry? What does your company do, and what do you specifically do as an individual within that company, within your team? If you've been with us before, welcome back. We're thrilled to have you with us as one of our frequent flyers. So what is on the agenda for today? First, we're going to start out by looking at how do we measure and improve data center lead generation and campaign performance. How do we measure and improve data center lead generation, campaign performance? Next, we'll talk about how to onboard and enable data center channel partners for better collaboration, how to onboard and enable your data center channel partners for much better collaboration with your internal team members. After that, we'll talk about how to attract and engage data center prospects with content marketing. Following that, we'll be at the halfway point, the halftime show, the midpoint of our weekly Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A. And in the second half, we'll look at how to identify and target the right data center ecosystem niches. We get that quite often. It's a big area that a lot of people want to fine tune. All things personas and ideal client profiles, niches, verticals, segments. After that, we'll look at how a co-location provider can balance real estate and IT services as their focus. And as we head down the home stretch on this week's show, we'll look at how to use data center buyer persona research to refine your go-to-market strategy. If you want to make sure that you get notified about upcoming educational events and resources just like this, be sure to subscribe to our Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter that comes to your email inbox on Sundays. To subscribe for free, you can visit our website at www.dcsmi.com, and you'll see a big subscribe button at the top of the homepage. In addition to that, if you have an idea for a topic or a question that you think that we should address as one of our top 6 that we address each week, be sure to leave that in the comments on whatever platform that you're watching on. And if we feel there's a topic that you're or challenge or question, a problem that you're grappling with that's of universal enough interest, we'll add that to the consideration queue to address on an upcoming show. So without any further delay, let's jump right into this week's first question, which is, how do we measure and improve data center lead generation campaign performance? So we want to measure and improve the campaign performance when it comes to lead generation. So what's interesting about that is a lot of times these questions talk about one particular part of the data center ecosystem or one particular part of the target market that you're going after. But this seems to be pretty universal. So it could just as easily apply to a data center operator or a technology or facilities company or construction, real estate investment, or even a sales and marketing related company. So what can we do to improve our lead generation campaign performance? And what do we do to better measure it? The first place to start is that when it comes to generating leads, we need to be more methodical, more disciplined than we've ever been because the stakes have never been higher. I'm sure you realize how just rapidly the data center ecosystem is growing right now because of all the demand that's being fueled by artificial intelligence, AI, all the cooling needs, power needs, because of all the GPUs, high performance computing, supercomputing, and quantum computing looming on the horizon in the coming years. But it's not just the insatiable demand for building and operating data centers to meet all of these new GPU-driven requirements. It's that at the same time this is going on, most buyers, most internal champions, most other stakeholders that work with these internal champions on the decision committees in your accounts have really dramatically changed in the last couple of years in terms of their preferences for how they research and make purchase decisions. 10 years ago, if we were talking about a data center lead generation strategy, we would have been able to count on the fact that most of your leads would get about halfway through their journey, halfway through their research and decision-making process. And they'd get to a point after they spent a lot of time looking up topics and reading the results that they find on a Google search and asking some questions of their peers on LinkedIn, or maybe watching some YouTube videos or attending some webinars. They'd get to the point where they're like, okay, I've taken this far enough along. I'm ready to talk to a person. How do I fill out a form to book a meeting with you? And at that time, depending on the nature of your business model, it might have been schedule a free consultation, schedule a tour if you're operating like a data center facility, or some other bottom of the funnel, high intent kind of hand raising action on their parts. At that time, about 10 years ago, CEB, the corporate executive board that's now part of Gartner, did research working with Salesforce and Serious Decisions. And they found that like 56, 57% of a typical journey was over before vendor contact or sales contact. So that wasn't too bad. If you did everything right, you could still count on the fact that you were in on these conversations for a little less than half of their research and decision-making process, the final 44% of the journey. Over the past 10 years, however, that time of like, oh, remember when we were in there for almost half of the sales cycle? That's very much in the rearview mirror, a point of nostalgia, of fond memories when it used to be a lot easier. What's changed in the past 10 years? Well, we had 10 years of digital transformation, tens of millions of people getting super comfortable, being a lot more independent, working from home at the beginning of the 2020s. We had a lot of baby boomers retire, a lot more Gen Z, a lot more millennials in decision-making roles. And we now find that that time when it was like 56, 57% of the journey, and they'd be ready to talk with someone from your team, that's now jumped all the way to 83%, and it's continuing to accelerate. In other words, Gartner's latest research found that 83% of a typical buyer's journey now happens without you in the room. And we have every indication that in many, many segments within the data center ecosystem that it's at like 90 or 95% over before they're ready to talk to you. It's just the self-driven journey is a really, really, really big deal. And it's been accelerated. The challenge has been compounded by the fact that as your buyers, your core ideal client profile, your addressable market, your prioritized buyer personas, as the large language model tools like ChatGPT and Copilot and Gemini and Perplexity continue to get better, It's not just the marketplaces that make self-service incredibly appealing to your buyers. It's that now all of the conversations that used to happen with someone like yourself now are in competition with not just a search, not just a LinkedIn question, not just a YouTube video, not just a podcast or a webinar, not just self-service marketplaces. No, it's gotten to the point where a lot of your prioritized buyer personas are so comfortable talking to AI, talking to these chat apps, that they would, in many contexts, rather talk to the chat app than talk to someone from your team. And this is an enormous, enormous challenge, but it's also a really big opportunity. If you wonder if this applies to your situation, think about your own circle of coworkers, of colleagues, peers, friends, and family members. I know in mine, for example, there's already people that are like, she talks to ChatGPT so often. It's like she's in a relationship with ChatGPT. It's like her second spouse. And I think we're going to continue to see this accelerate. And when you see prognosticators starting to predict that we're no more than a half a generation or a generation away from people starting to marry an AI robot, you start to realize that, oh, shoot, what the heck is going on? And how do we make it possible? How do we create an environment where our prospects and clients still want to spend time with us, as opposed to the 724, 365 free instant gratification machine winning by default? And it's not easy. And what we increasingly see happen throughout the data center ecosystem is we're seeing executives start to change the kind of person that they're hiring. In many cases, the first line of defense is that they're looking to hire, especially on sales teams, not necessarily people that were career salespeople, but people that were in a role in IT or engineering or construction or development or something like that, that's very similar to the kinds of prospects and clients that they're selling to. In other words, let's say, for example, that you have a telecommunications company and you've decided to segment your sales team by vertical market. And for example, you're looking for someone that's going to sell telecommunications to healthcare companies, both in traditional hospital clinic kind of settings and hospital data centers, healthcare data centers. So who better to understand what's going on inside in the mind of a healthcare IT executive, a health tech executive, than someone that used to work with healthcare executives? Because, for example, and I had someone on our podcast, on the Data Center Go to Market podcast a couple of weeks ago, that in the course of his career ran a hospital IT department for 4 years, and part of his responsibility included the data centers. Of course, he has superpowers when he goes in to meet with somebody that's a healthcare IT executive, because for 4 years, pretty recently, I think within the past half decade or so, he was a peer of that prospect. And we see this happening over and over and over again, where people are recruiting like engineers, non-traditional hires into sales and business development roles, because the reality is no one really needs your salesperson to read the website to them anymore, read the slides to them. I've had people on the Data Center Go to Market podcast who mentioned that as well, that one of the biggest turnoffs is when a salesperson comes in and they literally are just reading what they could have gotten on their own. No, what they want is someone that operates, that presents themselves more as a consultant, as a teacher, as a subject matter expert, as a trusted advisor, perhaps even a thought leader. Which means that the challenges for people that are relatively early on in their career, where it would be nearly impossible to have this institutional knowledge, what is their value? Well, in a lot of ways, their value can be, for a company that's adopted this culture, being a fantastic moderator, a tour guide, a concierge of all these ridiculously valuable educational resources and educational events experiences that you have for your very specific part of the market. So that's back to the question here again of measuring and improving lead generation campaign performance. I think we need to be more crisp than ever about our ideal clients and who in those accounts we need to be educating and building trust with, who we need to be creating awareness among. So going back to the basics, do not start a lead generation campaign if you're not crystal clear on your ideal client profile. So make sure there's a simple one-page document that says, this is the geographic territory, this is the company size range that's appropriate for our ideal clients that we've achieved product market fit with already. And depending on the nature of your category, it's not going to be everyone, Even Fortune 500 companies are not selling to everyone. You need to be and if you don't have those kind of resources, you need to be way more precise. So think about, by the nature of your business model, where can you market, sell, and service successfully? Can you truly do this globally, or is it within one particular region of the world, like Asia Pacific? Or is it one particular country within Asia Pacific, like Japan or Singapore or something like that? Now, once you've thought about the geographic components of your ideal client profile, I want you to think long and hard about the size, the company's size, upper range and lower end of the range. That has big implications as well for lead generation campaign performance, because you know your price points, right? You know what your entry level offering looks like. You know what your advanced offering looks like. You know kind of what an average client looks like in between and how they monetize. How big does a company need to be to afford your entry level offering, your entry level product or service? And at what point does your company get outmatched and overwhelmed by a huge enterprise client, that like a Fortune 50 or Fortune 500 company that comes in and makes all of these demands in terms of financial, insurance, regulation, integration, just things that you'd love to be able to do, but your company just is a little bit spread too thin. So you may, over time, discover, as you've achieved product market fit, that like your company is a perfect fit for clients, future clients, for prospects that have anywhere from, I don't know, say 50 employees up to 5,000 employees. So get that documented in your ideal client profile. If you're building a lead generation campaign and you're measuring that campaign performance, and you want to know how to measure and improve performance, let's make sure that we're really clear. Again, simple one-page ideal client profile. This is geographically where they're located. This is how big or how small their companies are. I know in our industry, everyone likes to talk about the kilowatts and the megawatts and square footage and square meters. And if that's relevant, by all means, add that as supplementary information. But when it comes to getting alignment across your go-to-market team, that ideal client profile is incredibly important. And then depending on the nature of your business model and where you're located, there may be a very strong need for you to get really specific about the industries, the vertical market segments that are an especially good fit and an especially bad fit for what it is that you do. Let's say, for example, that you're a co-location operator that's in the US or in Europe or something like that. When it comes to both businesses across the board, and especially within regulated industries, you know, there's certain kinds of buyers that are going to demand that you have certain accreditation, certain compliance requirements. They've invested in certain accreditations that says that your team and your facility, your process and everything are compliant with what they're looking for their industry. So you know if you're a good fit for that. If that's the case in your ideal client profile that drives your lead generation strategy, for sure those should be mentioned. You also likely know, if you've been doing this a while, that there's some objections from certain kinds of clients that have those kinds of requirements that your company may not be ready to have as clients today. Those should be mentioned as well in the context of your ideal client profile as specific exclusions. Because when it comes to figuring out everything from your website copywriting, your lead generation forms, what you do with targeting with paid ads, what you do with targeting with outbound campaigns, what you do with drop-down lists, what you do with filtering and views and workflow automations inside of your CRM and your customer relationship management program. If you're looking to measure and improve that data center lead generation campaign performance, we need to be very specific about who that ideal client is and who it is not. And your sales team needs to know that as well. Your client success team needs to, everyone that works on go-to-market needs to be very much aware of what this ideal client definition is. It needs to be kept current. It's not something that should sit under museum glass and not be altered for years. It should be reviewed at least once or twice a year to make sure that it still aligns with the reality of where you're achieving the best success and where your clients are achieving the highest net promoter score, where they're monetizing the best. Once you have that ideal client profile, that can drive your target account list of a couple dozen, a couple hundred, a couple thousand potential companies that fit that ideal client profile. And then, just as important as being specific about the account level or the company level that drives your lead generation, we need to get really crisp on the individual people within those accounts, the buyer personas, how you're going to segment, how you're going to personalize the perfect kind of person in those accounts that you want to be building a relationship with. A buyer persona is a semi-fictional representation of an ideal client or stakeholder based on actual research and some select educated speculation. One of the big mistakes that a lot of companies make when it comes to their lead generation strategy is sometimes it's all guesswork and it's all speculation. That's not good. The guesswork, asking your internal stakeholders for, hey, what do you know about this particular segment? When you've sold to them, when you've worked with them, when you've serviced them, when you've onboarded them over the years, that's great secondary input. I generally give second, about 20-25% of the equation should come from internal feedback. The other 75-80% of your buyer persona research should come from getting as close as possible to conversations with the actual people. If you can have face-to-face interviews or Zoom video interviews, that's fantastic. Next best thing would be being able to study the detailed conversation notes that are in your CRM and running surveys to prospects and clients and getting their own words about what's going on in their world to be as client-centric as possible. And if you don't have access to that, the absolute minimum, identify 10 or 20 representative people in each segment, go get their LinkedIn profile and see how they describe themselves in their own words. That's the key with all of this, is we're trying to get to the point in each of these most important segments: the primary buyer persona, the most important economic stakeholder; the secondary buyer persona, the second most important stakeholder. Maybe your process is complex enough that you have 3 or 4 different kinds of stakeholders. For each one of those segments, we want to be as client-centric as possible. So what that means is we need to know from their goals what they're trying to achieve in their job individually, as a team, and as a company. Sometimes this shows up in a job description. Sometimes this shows up on LinkedIn. Sometimes it shows up in their objectives and key results, which they're not going to share with you until they really trust you. That's usually a little further behind the curtain of understanding. But at the absolute minimum, we need to understand for that particular segment, what are the 5 or 6 big goals that they're currently working on that determine whether they get promoted, whether they get a bonus, whether they get to keep their job, in their own words. So what are they working on in their own words? Top 5 or 6 of those. We also need to know the flip side of that. What's driving them nuts? What are their biggest challenges? What are they struggling with the most in their own words? 5 or 6 big struggles. Again, those they're more than likely not going to be sharing on LinkedIn, sometimes in a job description, usually not. For those, you're usually going to need to run surveys, look in your CRM, have conversations, see what shows up in these interactions. And the more you lean into publishing and promoting educational content and educational events, the more you're in a position to gather additional data as well. A perfect example, at DCSMI, whenever we build a lead generation landing page, we're talking about lead generation campaign performance, right? We always have an open-ended question. We always ask something along the lines of your biggest sales and marketing challenge. And it's a free form question for them to write in. So for example, if your company was in telecommunications, your biggest telecommunications struggle. If you're a co-location operator, what's your biggest digital infrastructure challenge? If you are in decommissioning, what do you struggle with most when it comes to decommissioning a data center? So the interesting part, when you get that data, it hits their CRM record. So when your salesperson, pre or post sales, is working with that individual, you know exactly how they articulated that big challenge in their own words. Second, what's super interesting is for anyone that sells to a decision committee where there's multiple stakeholders involved, which increasingly is nearly all considered purchases because everyone's so ridiculously risk averse, it allows you to pull up 5 or 6 people that have filled out these lead generation forms for your newsletter, for your ebook, for your webinar registration, your lunch and learn event, whatever it is. Imagine 5 or 6 people from that company that have all written in that choice. And you can see, like, based on how they articulated their challenge, do those 5 or 6 people all say the same thing? Are they all on the same page? Or are they completely in disagreement about what that big challenge is with cybersecurity, physical security, decommissioning, co-location, whatever it is? That is incredibly valuable. So at the individual level, it allows you to personalize your outreach approach. At the team level, it allows you to figure out how multiple stakeholders agree or disagree about that particular topic. And then at the buyer persona level, as you start to aggregate hundreds or thousands of different responses, it's incredibly valuable for getting the consensus on the top 5 or 6 big challenges, the top 5 or 6 big goals that particular buyer persona is dealing with. And you want to repeat this exact same process for each one of your prioritized buyer personas. Now, what do you do once you have the top 5 goals and the top 5 challenges, top 5 or 6 goals and top 5 or 6 challenges? You have these 10 or 12 topics. You also have 10 or 12 months in a year. So what I would encourage you to do, one is to prioritize what you're hearing about more frequently, because those should go into the top of the list, right? More people are articulating that in their own words. But those 10 or 12 topics, 10 or 12 months, what I'd strongly recommend if you're looking for a much more effective way to measure and improve your data center lead generation campaign performance is to use that to drive your event strategy. Now, sometimes when I say events, people's default is thinking, oh, you want me to get a big booth at a conference? We love having big booths at conferences. We love sponsoring golf tournaments and having cabana parties and all that stuff. It's a blast. I'm like, it is, but where's the ROI? Well, in some cases, you might find it. In other cases, even with the magnifying glass, you may not find it quite as easily as being a lot more direct, a lot more specific about your lead generation strategy. So what I'd encourage you to do is to take those 10 or 12 topics and set up a regular situation where multiple client-facing team members of yours are able to educate and build trust with the ideal stakeholders in these ideal accounts. So what does this look like in practice? Those 10 or 12 topics end up being a monthly breakfast seminar, a monthly lunch and learn series, a monthly webinar series, if it's not as practical for your ideal clients to be able to attend in person. And each and every month for the next 10 or 12 months, you take all the people that are on your target account list and those prioritized buyer personas, and you invite them to an educational event where the focus of that event, the title comes pretty much from the consensus in their own words on a huge goal that you know that they're facing or a big challenge that you know you're struggling with. So once you have that, how do you get the speaker? In a perfect world, that speaker already works for your company. And you put a message on your Slack channel or email out, or you ask your boss or your coworkers, gee, who could we bring in that's an expert on cybersecurity best practices for manufacturing firms? Oh, well, it turns out Susan works on our cybersecurity team. 2 jobs ago, she actually worked for a company just like that. So let's see if we can get together with her and encourage her. Doesn't matter if she's had a ton of experience doing public speaking. These are relatively small groups in most cases. This is another thing that messes up a lot of people with events and lead generation. Because they're brainwashed into thinking that vanity metrics matter, they're investing in these really, really expensive national and global conferences where there's hundreds or thousands of people in attendance. But the reality is they may not have done the due diligence to make sure that most of the people that are in attendance are a good match for their ideal client profile, that most of the people line up with their prioritized buyer personas. If they do, great, go to that event. And even better, figure out a way that you can get into the top 3% of people attending that event, and you can be spending most of the time educating and building trust from the stage as opposed to begging for meetings. But yeah, for sure, if you have conferences where there's a very high match rate between your ideal clients and your ideal client profile and your buyer personas and their demographics, and you can put yourself in a position where you or someone from your team is on the stage educating and building trust, go for it. Do that all as often as you can. If you're not getting either of those, if there's either a crappy match between your ideal client profile and your prioritized buyer personas and their demographics, kind of put the orange light or the red light up. And if you're not getting to a place where you can educate and build trust from the stage, again, same issue. Maybe it's an orange light, may even be a red light. What should be a big, big green light, however, is recognizing that if you have a classroom or a conference room in your facility where it basically costs $0 for you to reserve it for an hour or two on the first Tuesday of the month, for the third Thursday lunchtime, 12 to 2 on the month or something like that. If it costs you very close to $0 and you already have a CRM with your target account list and you already have an email marketing program, what you figured out so far, and you already have an internal speaker who could give a talk for 30 or 45 minutes on a topic that's top of mind for one of your buyer personas. So far, we haven't spent any money yet. All we've done is invested some time on something that's incredibly targeted, putting together an event strategy and event registrations and emails and LinkedIn invites to be able to invent these folks. And about the only thing that you likely need to spend money on when you're hosting your own micro-targeted, incredibly targeted events for your target accounts is if it's a lunch and learn event, sure, you need to bring in lunch. What does it cost to bring in salads and sandwiches or pizza or something like that for 15 or 20 people? Pretty small in the whole scheme of things relative to what you'd spend to schlep your whole team to a national or global conference. These are the things that will make your CFO smile because like, hey, cool, we had 18 people filling up 20 seats in the conference room and nearly all of them from target accounts and your expense account. And you put in a receipt for $710 that they can deal with. Can they deal with $71,000 or $171,000 for a conference where you had a whole bunch of meetings, and the question is how many of those meetings were actually with people that line up with your ideal client profile and your buyer personas. So again, if you have resource constraints or you're just trying to dramatically improve your lead generation quality and campaign performance and measuring and improving, the number one place that I would start is putting yourself in a position where you can educate and build trust on a very regular basis early in the journey, throughout the full journey, and often throughout the journey, multiple touch points. This is not one and done. People typically go through 25 to 30 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision. The goal of your intentional lead generation program should be to put yourself in a situation where it's the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context. So we get you and your team out of the vendor box, so they instead see your client-facing team members as the be-all, end-all expert on anything and everything directly and indirectly related to your category. And we need to do this often because a very likely scenario is 12-part series. Part number one, you have one person from a target account attending. So there's 18 people attending in your conference room that seats 20 or 19 or 20 people, whatever it is. And you have like 18 or 20 different companies represented. By event number two, event number three, some of the people that have attended have gotten so much value from attending that all of a sudden the next time around that they get your confirmation message back that says, who else should attend? We know when it comes to cybersecurity for mid-sized hospitals, we know it's really a team effort. It takes a village. Typically, there's people involved from support, engineering, operations, cybersecurity, finance, compliance. So with that, who else from your team or other teams within your company would benefit from attending? You'd be shocked. That simple email marketing automation that you've been able to do for like 20 years. One, how few of your peers, how few of your competitors are so ridiculously lazy that they're not doing that. And second, how crazy effective that is of getting you to the point when you look at your registrant list for an upcoming event or an upcoming webinar, you're like, cool, it worked. It's like 5 or 6 people registered from the same company, 3 or 4 of them attending together. And you know, the cool part is when people from the same company attend together, you are proactively driving alignment in the formative stages of the journey. One of the biggest places that account executives struggle with is empowering their internal champion, supporting their internal champion to drive alignment across multiple stakeholders on the decision committee, across multiple members of their team and other teams within the company that are going to weigh in on this initiative. When you have multiple stakeholders from the same company attending together, you are putting yourself in a place where you can proactively influence the decision criteria that they use to evaluate all of the other options that are in your category. It is truly, truly a beautiful thing. And as you repeat this for part 3 and part 4, you'll start to notice when this is working well, that more and more people from the same company are attending and learning together. And when it really works well, one of them pulls you aside, and you're like, we're like half of the people that are in this. You have 20 seats in your conference room. There's 9 of us from the same company. Why don't you just come in next week? We're doing an offsite and present this to the whole department. Like, that would be awesome. Can I bring lunch? You want to talk about like putting yourself in a situation to dramatically knock competitive options out of consideration. That's how you do it. That's how you get on the short list, stay on the short list, knock your competition out of the short list, and get back in early and often in a world that increasingly favors self-service. Remember, they're more sales allergic than they've ever been, but they still need to learn valuable skills that can help them do their job better. So to the extent that you can create a learning and development, a professional development program where you're continually teaching them how others in similar job functions and similar companies are approaching these goals or approaching these challenges, and share some of the best practices from some of the smartest people in your company and your contractors and your channel partners, and cross-pollinating the clients, beautiful things will happen with improving the effectiveness of your lead generation campaign performance. So that's how I would approach it at a high level, measuring and improving your data center lead generation campaign performance is build everything around educating and building trust with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context, so they stop seeing you as a data center vendor and instead see you and your team members as some of the smartest people on the planet when it comes to anything and everything having to do with your category. That's how to measure and improve data center lead generation campaign performance. Okay, what is up next? By the way, if you're getting good value so far from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure to hit the like button to help spread the word. Next question is all about channel partners. How do we onboard and enable data center channel partners for better collaboration? How do we onboard and enable data center channel partners for better collaboration? So regardless of what your company does in the ecosystem, regardless of whether you work for a data center operator or a technology or facilities related company or a construction, real estate or investment company or outsourced sales and marketing company, over the last several years, there has been a huge surge of interest among executives and board members from these companies in dramatically growing the ranks of channel partners, regardless of your business model and regardless of your channel partners' particular business models. So channel partners are typically an extension, an unofficial extension of your company's existing efforts that, instead of being hired on a full-time salaried basis, are basically compensated based on outcomes, based on bringing in new business, or in some cases, maintaining and retaining existing business. And that's been a big change that's happened over the last several years. Is I've worked on channel partner initiatives throughout nearly my whole career. Actually began originally working for a program in the early 1990s, really dating myself, when I was still in college, on a national program that IBM was running for higher education. It was run by a part of IBM called Academic Information Systems. And they hired college students all over the US to evangelize early generation PCs and Windows. So we did a lot of co-marketing with Microsoft, and a lot of what we were marketing and selling was a heavily discounted, curated collection of PCs and software and peripherals that were optimized for students, faculty, and staff of colleges and universities. So we weren't IBM employees. The program was administered by a leading staffing company at the time. I think they're actually still around, called Manpower. Today, that the arrangement would be known as like a PEO, a professional employer organization. And interestingly enough, for the first year or so of the program, we're working directly for employees in the branch office. This was at Rutgers University in central New Jersey. The branch office at the time was in Lawrenceville, New Jersey, very close to Princeton, Trenton, that particular area. In year 2 of the program, we increasingly saw a lot of the grown-ups that we were working with be contractors themselves. There was another company they were contracted with who was fantastic at running field events. So we'd run these big campus fairs, and 10 or 12 really well-known consumer product national companies would each have a booth there. I would help to drive visibility. What they were optimizing around is they realized that when you're a student for the first time living on your own or commuting, you have control over discretionary spending. And if they can get you to latch on to being loyal to PCs and Windows, and Apple was hugely involved with this as well, there's a really good chance that when you go in, you get your first job in the workplace and your boss says, what should we standardize on? You go with what you know. Interestingly enough, about 10 years ago, HubSpot picked up on this as well. And they put together a masterful program where they made HubSpot software available to marketing professors globally to adopt HubSpot Academy's software and training curriculum as part of college courses. And what do you think students are going to be loyal to when they graduate with their degree, when their employer says, hey, what should we do for marketing technology? What should we do for our CRM? I've watched Microsoft also in the course of my career in the late 1990s, early 2000s, actually worked with the Microsoft Small Business Server team in Redmond and the Microsoft Direct Access Channel Partner team on content. I wrote a book for them. And I've just seen so many fantastic things happen over the years with companies that invest with the right mindset into channel partner initiatives. Now, the right mindset's really important. I see a lot of times people come to me that want to recruit channel partners, and they're not, and they're really doing this prematurely. What do we mean by prematurely? Well, a really early stage company, when it gets to the point that it has a lot of clarity about who its ideal clients are, what products and services they purchase, and what quantities, frequencies, and price points, and know all their unit economics, that's an early stage company that's said to have achieved product market fit. Before they've achieved product market fit, there's just a lot of big question marks about what they're really doing. And that's usually an essential milestone to getting to a first round of funding if your company is venture backed or just showing some degree of commercial success that you've figured out. And typically those struggles are happening with a company that's significantly below 50 employees, significantly below several million in revenue, US revenue, or your local currency equivalent. The next milestone above and beyond product market fit is go-to-market fit. That's where you've progressed to the point that other people besides founders of the company can actually sell your product or service for you. And that's, again, also extraordinarily important to put together the playbooks and the sales process for successfully onboarding and retaining and account management for new potential clients. That's an incredibly important milestone. That's also really important for funding, because you want to make sure when you go, whether it's debt, whether it's capital, whether it's taking on new sources of investment, or just knowing what you're doing to have a more predictable outcome, that as you put more capital and you hire more people onto your team, that the wheels aren't going to fall off, that you can have predictable outcomes. So that next milestone is go-to-market fit. In order for a company to truly have a successful channel partner, you can start with the channel partnership program with a company that's relatively small, but not so small that you haven't first achieved those milestones. Because without those milestones, you can't know who you're really looking for, and you certainly can't coach and advise your channel partners on what to do. And if you're using them as guinea pigs, if you're running experiments on your channel partners, that's a really fast way to burn bridges, burn a lot of bad goodwill, and people have long memories if you've screwed them over, for lack of a better word. So I always encourage companies, even when they're relatively early on and they're enamored with the idea of channel partners, to wait till at least they're to the point where they have a small, successful sales team of their own, a marketing team of their own, and services and support team of their own, because it's those best practices that you figured out that you're going to need to train your channel partners on. And remember, like, it's going to, some parts of having channel partners will make it go faster. You'll get access to their client list, their book of business, and that can dramatically accelerate it. But in terms of like their attention span relative to you, like when you hire a sales development rep or an account executive or an account manager that's working for you full time, you can count on the fact that you're going to have their undivided attention 35, 45, 50 hours a week, whatever it is. And because of that, you can expect them to ramp up with a pretty predictable outcome. With channel partners, they're not working for you 100% of the time. They're not working for you 50% of the time or 25% of the time. A typical value-added reseller or system integrator or a managed service provider or a master agent, they may have 10, 20, 30 different programs, companies like yours, that they're working with. Let's keep the math simple. Let's say there's 20 different programs that they're working with. So they can give you about 5% of their attention. So what's 5% of 40 hours a week? That's 2 hours a week. But that doesn't tell the whole story. That would mean that that person is 100% dedicated to working on channel partner programs. Usually, in a small channel partner, that's not even remotely the case. Usually, they're working on business development for channel partner programs maybe 1 day a week. So you're talking about 5% of 20%. Not fantastic at that kind of math, but 5% or 20% sounds a lot like you're getting 1% of their time and energy. So when you start to realize that, it's like, okay, yeah, it's cool. You don't have to make a financial investment. You're not paying them a salary. You're not paying for their time off or pension, retirement, health insurance, professional development. Well, actually, professional development, you should be. Professional development, training, and channel partner enablement is incredibly important to you, giving your channel partners access to the similar kind of training resources that you give to your internal team members, because you're trying to empower your channel partners to act as an unofficial extension of your sales team, of your marketing team, of your client success, of your support professional services organization, depending on the nature of your business model. So I think the key with all of this is to have expectations that if you think you need 3 months of ramp time and a 3-month sales cycle for a newly hired sales development rep or account executive to figure out what's really going on, that 3 to 6 months is barely scratching surface on expectations with a channel partner. Because remember, that SDR, that AE is working for you 100% of the time. The channel partner may have 10, 20 or more different commitments that they're working at a given time. So playing the long game is super important. Second, a huge thing that people underestimate is, in the same way it's super important to know your ideal client profile and have a target account list and prioritize buyer personas to understand the goals and challenges of your most important personas, your channel partners need exactly that same kind of methodology. So I always encourage people, in the same way you have an ideal client profile, you should have an ideal partner profile. Where are these partners located? How big or how small are their companies? Are there certain industries or business models or verticals that they tend to be in that would make them more successful than others with your company? And from that, you should be able to build out a list of potential channel partners that you want to reach out to and build relationships with, to potentially recruit as your channel partners. And depending on your geographic area, your business model, their size, your size, it may be anywhere from a couple dozen to a few hundred or maybe even a few thousand potential companies. And then within those accounts, who are the people that matter most? The one that matters the most is your primary persona, just like a regular segmentation strategy. The second most important would be your secondary buyer persona. So if you're selling to relatively small managed service providers throughout your nation that have anywhere from, say, I don't know, 10 employees up to 200 employees or something like that, maybe your primary point of contact is an owner, CEO, president, or equivalent. Your secondary contact might be their CTO or VP of IT or something like that. And again, your mileage will vary quite a bit depending on the nature of your business model, your company size, their business model, their company size. But it's that same kind of framework that I'd be thinking about for figuring out your strategy to make sure that you're targeting the right people in the first place. And then the second part of all of that, for better collaboration with onboarding and enable them, is in the same way that you take great pains to figure out the goals and challenges of your buyer personas, you need to take great pains to figure out the goals and challenges of your channel partners, because they're going to articulate very different words about what they're trying to achieve and what they're struggling with compared to your other buyer personas. So get those in their own words and then use that to build your channel partner strategy. At the absolute minimum, those top 5 or 6 goals, those top 5 or 6 challenges in their own words are like gold for copywriting when it comes to putting together the part of your website that's for potential channel partners. If you're just guessing without that information, like, good luck. And it's so much more precise, so much more predictable, so much more likely that you attract the right person in the right scenario if you're using their exact words for what they're trying to achieve in their business and what they're struggling with their business in the language and the copywriting on your website. And this should filter through to your lead generation offers. This should filter through to your event strategy, your webinar strategy, your email marketing campaigns, your ads, your outreach, and for sure, how you onboard and enable channel partners. That's the other thing as well. So we talked about go-to-market fit. We talked about product market fit. After go-to-market fit, how do you know things are really starting to cook, are really starting to kick in, working well with your channel partners? Well, in the same way that for go-to-market fit, we want to see that you're consistently hiring account executives, sales development reps, sales managers, sales directors, and that most are achieving or exceeding quota and that you don't have a revolving door of turnover. We're looking for the same thing to get to channel partner market fit. If I'm a potential channel partner and I'm evaluating whether I want to bet my business on participating in your program, I'm looking at that website page and I'm looking to see other channel partners talk about the value of that relationship, what they've gotten out of partnering with your company. What have been the benefits? What have been the struggles? How long they've been a partner for? specifics, like it's improved their lifetime value by X%. What the more the better. And the more likely that person and their company is known to me or familiar to me or similar to me, the more it's going to even resonate in terms of social proof. So in the same way with go-to-market fit, I'm looking to make sure that there's not a revolving door problem. I'm looking to see with your channel partner program, who's been successful in this program in the past. How long have they been working with your company? What kind of things do they say about it? What kind of business impact do they have? And how similar is that organization to mine as a potential channel partner? So that's in the marketing, to make sure that you're getting the right people. So there's channel marketing, and then there's channel activation or enablement. Now, a lot of people underestimate the amount of work that needs to go into the channel marketing as well. If you work for a huge company, say you're trying to recruit potential partners for Microsoft or Cisco or Digital Realty or Equinix, we're extreme blue chip brand. You will not have to work very hard to get potential channel partners to take a meeting with you, to open up your cold email, to be enticed by coming to an event that's focused on learning about why they'd want to be a channel partner of yours. If you're at the other extreme where you have an unknown brand, there's definitely some serious channel marketing that needs to happen. And if you're cold pitching them on taking a sales meeting with you to sign up and onboard as a channel partner, that's about as off-putting as cold pitching someone on taking a sales meeting with you that's never heard of or know anything about your company. So start with where they are in the same way you do with your prospects and clients. You know there's specific goals they're struggling with to achieve. You know there's specific challenges they're struggling to achieve. That's the focus early on, is teach them some useful best practices about how other channel partners are navigating some of those big challenges. And oh yeah, by the way, this is what, if you're curious about what it would be like to have a channel partner relationship with your company, but start by leading with education. So in the same way that you might be doing like a breakfast seminar, a lunch and learn series, or webinar series, potential channel partners need that as well. Do not make the arrogant assumption that everyone that you meet is immediately primed to sign up and on board and become a new channel partner. It would be ridiculous. If your brand is relatively new, if you haven't achieved channel partner market fit, they're taking a risk on your company. And one of the best ways that you can mitigate that risk is education and trust building. And the education and trust building usually starts by over-indexing and investing on the kind of educational resource and educational events that get them to know, like, and trust your client-facing team members. So when it comes to onboarding and enabling, it's taking that same insight that you understand about who they are and what makes them tick, and figuring out how you're going to apply that in the same way that you onboard and enable newly hired clients. So if your company has go-to-market fit and you have anywhere from a couple handfuls to a couple dozen or hundreds of salespeople, hundreds of account managers, or even dozens, I'm sure at this point you have a way to successfully onboard new employees. If you don't, everything would have come crashing down a long time ago. So in the same way that you have an onboarding plan and onboarding new sales hires and onboarding new account managers and onboarding new product managers and onboarding new support reps and enabling those, in sales, we call that sales enablement. In the channel partner world, we call it channel partner enablement. So in the same way that you have these resources for internal team members, these need to be adapted and customized for the needs of your channel partner buyer personas. In most cases, usually there's some proprietary information that you decide you want to hold back on. That's an individual choice that usually gets decided all the way at the executive level on what you feel comfortable sharing with employees as opposed to sharing with channel partners. But for sure, that same kind of mindset of having a structured onboarding program, usually involving some training courses, maybe a certification exam or two to prove competency, can be incredibly powerful. And then enablements and reinforcement and recognizing that this isn't one and done. You're always going to be enabling. You're always going to be trying to introduce, in the same way that you introduce your account executives and your SDRs and your account managers to new products and services and updates to new products and services. That's the exact same thing with your channel partners. You don't live in a static world. They don't live in a static world. There's always new things changing. So channel partner enablement for sure is not one and done. That's something you should be working on all of the time. And whether it's a monthly webinar series, a monthly newsletter, a channel partner portal, or all of the above, case study interviews with other channel partners that are knocking it out of the park. Again, these are all incredibly, incredibly valuable ways to continue to reinforce the opportunity for the channel partner and why their prospects, why their clients would care. In other words, you're onboarding, you're training, you're enabling, you're supporting these channel partners to be an extension of your own company's marketing, of your company's own sales process, of your company's own onboarding and support process for your particular product and service. So this is how I'd be thinking about this. And remember, in the same way that your highly technical IT professionals and engineers and other folks that you sell to are more sales allergic than they've ever been in the history of the IT industry, your channel partners are as well. So we have to work extra hard to build up the know, like, and trust, to educate and build trust among these folks so they trust you enough to essentially bet their business on what you're actually doing. And they know if they choose right, most of the time it'll work out for their business. Most of the time it'll work out for their clients, but just understand why they're a little bit skeptical, why they're a little cynical, why they're a little skittish. And the better job you can do with proactively understanding what's going on in their world, the better off you're going to be. And in much the same way that sales teams are now hiring people that are more peers of the prospects and clients they're selling to, I'm increasingly seeing throughout the data center ecosystem and technology ecosystem at large that many of the best channel account managers and channel consultants are former channel partners themselves. And it doesn't even have to be a channel partner of your company. It just could be that they understand, like, let's say you sell something related to cybersecurity and you want to have channel partners. The perfect person to be your channel manager, to be a channel salesperson, to potentially be your channel chief, head of your whole program, to recruit channel partners for this, maybe someone that worked in some kind of, either owned or worked in some kind of role at a managed service provider or a managed security service provider, an MSP or an MSSP or something like that, that comes from the channel partner ecosystem as well, because they'll see potential prospects, prospective channel partners, existing channel partners will see that person as a former peer of theirs that really understands what's going on in their world. And the key, the empathy, walking a mile in their shoes, kilometer in their shoes, is so incredibly important. So these are all the things that I'd be thinking about when it comes to onboarding and enabling data center channel partners for better collaboration. From a mechanical perspective, yes, in the same way that customer education, channel partner education, academies, training and certification exams, standard operating procedures, rubrics, methodologies, all incredibly, incredibly important. But for most companies, this starts at the executive level of giving your channel partner initiative the appropriate runway, the appropriate resources to have a chance for success. All too often, I see a lot of people with companies that are very early stage coming to me with a wing and a prayer that they want channel partners, and it's a little bit too early for them to really be able to support those channel partners as well. From a competitive standpoint, I'd look around at what kind of resources and amenities that your potential channel partners are expecting from other channel programs that they're actively involved in. And you don't have to be able to get a perfect score on all of that, but you should just be aware of what kind of support they're looking for before you decide to jump into the deep end with growing your company's channel partner ranks, growing your channel partner ecosystem. So that's what I'd be thinking about when it comes to onboarding and enabling data center channel partners for better collaboration. Okay, what is up next? What's our next topic for this week? That's an interesting one. This comes to us from a different part of the data center ecosystem than we usually get questions from. So the data center industry ecosystem, we divide up into operators, technology, facilities, construction, real estate, and investment, all kind of going hand in hand, and then outsourced sales and marketing. Outsourced sales and marketing could be sales brokers, commission-only advisory firms, manufacturers, reps, distributors, marketing agencies, PR agencies. We consider recruiters actually part of outsourced sales and marketing as well. Media companies, events companies, conference producers, associations. We all consider that part of outsourced sales and marketing in one way, shape, or form for the data center ecosystem. So this question is from there. This is from a company that specializes in content marketing. So how do we attract and engage data center prospects with content marketing? Oh, that's actually, now that I'm reading this, they don't necessarily have to be in the content marketing business. They could be anywhere in the data center ecosystem, but they want to use content marketing as part of the way to attract and engage their prospects. So with that in mind, content marketing is incredibly important today. Educational events, thought leadership resources are incredibly important today. Why? Because 10 years ago, it was quite common for your prospects and clients to spend about half of their research and decision making on their own, like looking up topics on Google, asking questions of their peers on LinkedIn, attending webinars, watching YouTube videos, going to review websites, listening to podcasts, maybe sometimes going to some self-service marketplaces, but the self-service marketplaces weren't that big of a deal 10 years ago. Fast forward 10 years, they're a huge deal today, because what's ended up happening is it used to be like they'd get to 56, 57% of the sales process, buyer's journey, and then they'd be like, okay, now I'm ready to talk to someone from your sales team. Now they're taking that all the way pretty much through, not quite to 100% across the board, but definitely there's some commoditized categories that are 100% self-service now. But most of the data center ecosystem, they're getting most of the way there before they're open to meeting with someone from your sales team. Gartner puts this number at 83%. We actually think that number is a little bit on the low side. We put it more at like 90, in some cases, 95% of the buyer's journey being over before a prospect is willing to meet with someone from your sales team. So in this environment, a lot of education and trust building that used to happen face to face in the context of like free needs assessments, free audits, touring co-location facilities, all of these kind of bottom of the funnel, late stage sales interactions, they're getting much, much further along before they're open to those. So because of that, because the self-driven journey is the predominant journey where you're essentially, your sales team is in competition with generative AI. Might seem a little crazy at first, but let me explain what I mean by that. What's happened is over the last 2 or 3 years, as OpenAI and ChatGPT and all the competitors with Copilot and Gemini and Claude and Perplexity and Grok have gotten better and better and more mainstream, it's gotten to the point where a significant amount of IT professionals and engineering professionals and all of the typical prospects that pop up when it comes to being prioritized by our personas throughout the data center ecosystem, nearly all are to the point now where they would rather have a conversation, with quotes around conversation, with their favorite chat app than talk to a human that's on your sales team, especially if they sense that that human may not be able to add very much value relative to the kinds of questions they have, not to mention the immediate gratification part of instant free access to solving their questions. So what that means is members of your sales team have to work so much harder now to earn their way in early and often, to have a role, to have a presence in that first 83, 85, 90% of the buyer's journey. That's changing the nature of how your company hires going forward. They're looking for a lot more subject matter experts and consultants and trusted advisors rather than people that just identify by the traditional account executive or sales developer kind of title. It's changing the nature of how you hire. It's changing the nature of how you invest in workforce development and cross training and upskilling and all the things that make your internal team members way more valuable to your prospects and clients than they ever have been in the past, because they essentially see those folks in a very different light than their traditional labels. And for most companies, kind of the first cousin of content marketing actually really is a form of content marketing, these great educational experiences. So let's say, for example, you have a data center commissioning company or a data center cooling company, and you know the 2 or 3 different kinds of stakeholders that you typically market and sell to and service to over time. And once you have a really good handle on who those stakeholders are, you know exactly, you've done your customer insight research, you know exactly who they are and what's going on in their world. And you know so well that you've gotten them to articulate their biggest goals and challenges in their own words. Those goals and challenges should form the backbone of your content marketing strategy. If it isn't at this stage of the game, more than likely, you're going to spin your wheels and come out with a lot of tone deaf messaging that just doesn't resonate at all. But once you know exactly who these ideal clients are and who the prioritized buyer personas in these accounts, study the heck out of what's going on in their world so you can reach the consensus on their top 5 or 6 goals and their top 5 or 6 challenges in their own words. Their own words forms the backbone of your copywriting, of your brand guide, of how you're going to articulate your website pages, like the Who We Help pages on your website, and the lead generation offers that go along with those for the early and middle and late stage offers, your call to action buttons, your email subject lines, your whole email marketing program, your social media posts, your digital ads, your event strategy should all be grounded in those 10 or 12 topics in their own words on what's top of mind for that very specific buyer persona. And that's the key with all of this, is when we get to a world where instant gratification is never been more accessible than it's ever been in the past. Like, people, you don't know the time of day or the time of week when they're going to decide to prioritize the research and prioritize what they're doing that's in your category. And it'd be nearly impossible, even with a 724, 365 chat operator that's human, to not only be able to staff that, but staff that with people that can instantly provide those kinds of answers. So what we're trying to do is create an environment where your account executives, your account managers, your marketers, your sales development reps stay relevant by getting out of that vendor box and being seen more as an extension of your prospects and clients' professional development and learning and development, more than just being a vendor. And in order to do that with your content marketing program, we need to be incredibly precise about who they are, what they care about, and how we can add value to their professional lives, how we can teach them some useful best practices that align extraordinarily closely with the goals and challenges they've already articulated. So let's say, for example, for your data center commissioning company, you're selling to a VP of data center development, you're selling to a chief engineering officer or chief commissioning officer or something like that. So we know exactly what's going on in that person's world. As we go about creating downloadable premium content, email newsletters, webinars, lunch and learns, all of that, we need to keep all of those goals in mind with our content, with our marketing, with our sales enablement. So instead of being seen as corporate messaging with all kinds of marketing babble speak, we're instead speaking their language, using their exact words. And in a perfect world, the byline content, the speaker at the events, looks pretty close to the kind of background that they have. So in other words, the perfect person to be the guest speaker at an event for data center commissioning executives is someone that, one, works with tons of data center commissioning executives in their role with your company, and two, perhaps even worked as a data center commissioning executive with a data center operator, an enterprise with their own data centers in the past. So the prospects and clients that are attending that event see that person as a peer. That's the unlock with all of this, with hyper relevance and really standing out from the crowd to attract and engage, is that your subject matter experts, your teachers, your consultants, your trusted advisors that work for your team, a lot of the reason why they resonate or fail to resonate comes down to how well they know that ecosystem, how well they know that industry, how well they know that buyer personas. And one of, by far and away, the most effective ways to attract and engage them in the context of content marketing is hosting your own educational events. These can be breakfast seminars, lunch and learns, after hours, evening versions of this. Hey, if weekends work better, knock yourself out. Again, this is about optimizing for their timing, not what's convenient for you, but what's convenient for them. If you discover that it's not easy for them to be able to travel for a 45-minute event or something like that, host it virtually or live, or offer both, where people can attend it in person, or they can also live stream the event. And of course, record it and repurpose that. There's always going to be a lot more people who should have attended that weren't able to attend. And you'll always get people at the event or at the webinar that approach you that say, hey, my boss might really needed to be here. My NOC manager really needed to be here. Our cybersecurity person really needed to be here. Can we get the slides? Can we get the recording? Absolutely. And then you take those, and that drives a huge part of your content marketing going forward, because you can repurpose the recording from that event dozens of different ways: individual sections, shorts, carousels, documents, emails, social posts, infographics, blogs, downloadable premium content, the whole. You can roll those together. You're having a 12-part series, right? A 6-part series that's all for the same buyer persona. Then you roll that together and you essentially have an academy. And you could have a multiple choice exam at the end where you certify. All of these are fantastic, fantastic ways to unlock more value, to attract and engage data center prospects with content marketing. But it starts with a cultural mandate, usually starting from the most executive levels of your company, if you're a small to mid-sized company, and at least at like the divisional leadership level, subsidiary leadership level, if you're a much larger company. But yeah, these are big culture changes for a lot of companies. If most of your marketing and sales budget goes into very traditional, conventional activities that you could have done 20 or 25 years ago, before the smartphone existed, before Google existed, before LinkedIn and YouTube existed, before webinar existed, there's a really good chance that a huge percentage of your budget is going to investments that are completely out of touch with how your prospects and clients actually want to engage with your company. And remember, in a self-driven journey, you're immediately on the defensive. You're immediately treading water. They're more sales allergic than they've ever been. The cheat code with all of that, the unlock with all of this, is they still need to learn. So to the extent that you can be part of their learning and development and professional development process by educating and building trust early and often, by early, getting in as early in the journey as possible to be able to influence the criteria that they use to evaluate a category, and often is incredibly important as well. Think of 25 or 30 touch points. I want you to saturate as much of the surface area as possible of those 25 to 30 touch points and completely starve the oxygen away from competitive, indirect competitive, and non-business model competitive alternatives. Because when they're learning so much from your team, they're going to bring their coworkers with them, and you will proactively drive alignment. And when you have multiple stakeholders, multiple members of the decision committee learning from your client-facing team members, beautiful things start to happen with being able to dramatically influence the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the different options in front of them. When you do well with all of this, not only do you get on the short list and stay on the short list throughout the full journey, competitive options start to disappear from the short list, to the point where when they're finally ready for a sales related conversation, when they hit that 83% point, 85% point, 90% point, and they're finally ready for that conversation, many times you will discover that there may not be much competition at all left on that short list. In some cases, exquisite things happen, and there's no one left on their short list, because they've discovered that no one can hold a candle to what they already have learned from your company, and they are incredibly psyched about moving forward with working with your company. So your content marketing, your customer education program, your academy, whatever you want to call this or brand this, has done exactly what it was supposed to do: early and often educate and build trust. That's how I would approach attracting and engaging data center prospects with content marketing. If you're getting good value so far from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure that you hit the like button to help spread the word. And if you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you think we should address in an upcoming show, be sure to drop that in the comments, and we'll add that to the consideration queue for an upcoming episode. We're going to take a real quick break for a message from our sponsor. And when we come back, we're going to tackle 3 more of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from out the global data center ecosystem.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales marketing and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com. Now, back to Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A.
Hey there, it's Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and you are tuned into the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, our weekly live show where each week we tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about throughout the global data center, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities ecosystem. So what's up next? Speaking of ecosystem, next up, we're going to dive into niches and verticals and areas of specialization. And this person wants to know, how do we identify and target the right data center ecosystem niches? How do we identify and target the right data center ecosystem niches? That is a fantastic question. And it's one that can be relatively challenging for early stage companies, because early on, what you're trying to figure out in the life cycle of your company is, who are the ideal clients? what products or services are they going to purchase from our company, at what price points, at what terms, at what frequencies. And basically, it should help to figure out all of the core unit economics, things like monthly recurring, annual recurring revenue if your business is based on a subscription type of model, or lease if co-location or something like that. It should also help to you to back into like what your cost of acquisition is, COCA, cost of client acquisition, or CAC, sometimes known as client acquisition costs, what your average sales cycle length is, what your margins are, all of the numbers that help to get your CFO, your finance team excited that you know what you're doing with having a repeatable, scalable business. So that's a lot of what cycles are spent on in the first few years of the company, is getting to the point you get to product market fit and then go to market fit, where you've gotten confident enough with being able to hand sales process off to non-founders, and you have a predictable enough sales process that as you hire more and more sales folks and account executives and SDRs and sales managers and sales directors, that you know that you have a repeatable process that people can onboard and ramp smoothly and be productive within 1 or 2 sales cycle lengths, and that your clients have you get the right clients and they get a predictable outcome, and they're happy with all of this, with net promoter scores and retention and margins, that everything's working out well for all 3 parties that are involved with this. So with all of this in mind, how do you identify and target the right data center ecosystem niches? A lot of just is running these demand generation experiments, hiring team members, building the process, refining the sales process, refining the onboarding process, getting your new clients to initial value, intended value, and extended value, being able to successfully land and expand, run cross-selling and upskilling and cross-selling and upselling kind of programs and customer marketing kind of programs, channel partners, just another version of all of this, of figuring out what's working and what's not, and doing a lot more of what's working. But when it comes to identifying and targeting the right data center ecosystem niches, it really is, I wouldn't say it's straightforward and simple as running this, but in order to be able to figure out what these niches are, you need to figure out who your best clients are, who your ideal clients are. And for a lot of companies, when they do this well, they're usually not shy about screaming from the rooftops who these folks are. So like, we can look at your website and we may see a image slider with logos of your favorite clients or representative clients. We may see testimonials and reviews from representative clients, and maybe a case study section of your website. And what we're essentially looking for is, what do these social proof items have in common? Do they all tend to be located in the same geographic area? Are they within a certain company size band, where like the smallest ones have a couple dozen employees and the largest ones have a few hundred employees or a few thousand employees? And are they tend to be clustered in similar kinds of business models and similar kind of verticals and similar kinds of industry niches? And it's when you get to the point where you have extreme clarity on that, that it becomes a lot easier to know what to do next, and a lot easier to justify investing way more aggressively in your go-to-market strategy and your company's growth. Without that, usually you see investors, board members, founders, owners being very timid about investing. They want to go as fast as possible, but they're usually very reluctant to put a lot of capital into the business until they have a lot of clarity on that, which is why you see a lot of companies in the outsourced sales and marketing segment of the data center ecosystem that oftentimes have either published or unpublished guidelines on how big a company needs to be before they can really afford to work with their firm. So sometimes you see people, okay, they need to have at least 10 employees and be at $1 million revenue or your local currency equivalent, or they need to be at 30 employees or 50 employees and 3 to 5 million or your local currency equivalent in revenue, or something along those lines. So yeah, it's everyone just really figuring out how to optimize who's a good fit for them. And then it's the same thing with your clients, as they're trying to figure out who their ideal clients are. And without having clarity around that sense of product market fit and go-to-market fit, or perhaps even channel partner market fit, it's tough to know really how to target. If you don't know what direction you're going in, someone can drop in the comments and let me know, what's that Alice in Wonderland quote? If you don't know what direction you're going in, everything looks like the right way. Or the famous Bill Gates quote decades ago, where do you want to go today? Like, you really do directionally need to know. It's not a great idea to get in the car and hit the random button when it comes to your destination for where you want Google Maps or Waze or Apple Maps to take you or something like that. You do really have to have a destination with identifying and targeting the right ecosystem niches. And for most companies, it's usually a matter of running demand generation experiments, having some of those clients close, seeing of those clients that close, who were the happiest, the highest net promoter score, where did you get the best unit economics, were the most profitable, and which kinds of clients do you want more of? That's usually what drives identifying and targeting. And the smaller your company is, the more likely it is that these strategic decisions on who you want more of go all the way to the C level. But there's certainly areas that your chief revenue officer, your chief commercial officer, your chief product officer, your chief financial officer, everyone is paying attention to this and trying to figure out what the general direction of the company should be. Certainly, the process of having like annual sales kickoffs helps to reinforce this, like looking at, okay, of the existing clients and what's on the road, the product roadmap for the next 1, 2, 4 quarters upcoming, where do we think we should be going? And that usually is a big determinant of identifying and targeting the right ecosystem niches. And from that, tighten up that ideal client profile so you know exactly where they're located. For a lot of companies, there's some very natural guardrails that come up with geographic, depending on whether you sell something that can be delivered digitally as opposed to needing to be delivered in person. Perfect example would be, let's say you sell cybersecurity services or virtualization services. That's a perfect example of something where nearly all can be delivered long distance. So you don't have as many geographic restrictions as someone that makes hydrogen fuel cells or modular data centers or something where there's definitely freight and shipping and logistics costs that come with transporting by truck or railroad or freighter ship or barge or something like that. So yeah, there's definitely some business model issues that impact the geographic part of your ideal client profile. Size is always going to be a factor as well. You know what your price points are of your various levels of offerings of your various products and services. And along the same lines, you probably have a pretty good idea for your entry level program, how big a company needs to be to afford it. And at the upper end of the range, if you've been at this a while, you may have discovered that as cool as it is to have logo accounts on your website, sometimes the juice isn't worth the squeeze, as they say. And sometimes they're disqualifying you because they have financial requirements, insurance requirements, integration requirements, a host of requirements that a Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 company or Fortune 50 company may be demanding of your company that you just simply can't deliver on today. And that would say force you to have a more self-aware, more realistic, like upper end of the range where you say like, okay, in our ideal client profile, to afford our entry program, they need to have at least 50 employees or 200 employees or something like that. And at the upper end of the range, we do pretty well up till about 10,000 employees. So maybe your range on your ideal client profile for the identifying and targeting is companies that have anywhere from 200 to 10,000 employees. Obviously, this needs to be customized and contextualized for your business model, your company size, their company size. But I'm just kind of walking you through how most people would think about these kinds of questions. And then in terms of the industries and the verticals, a lot of what drives the industries and the targeting and the niches is certain kinds of business models in the data center ecosystem, depending on where you're located and depending on whether you're serving regulated niches or not, regulated industries or not, kind of force either your company is qualified and certified and has the accreditations and compliance to be able to work with that kind of company from a regulated industry, or it doesn't. Like, for example, depending on where you're located, if you want to work with healthcare or financial services or government or something like that, there's a pretty good chance that there is some credentialing that you need to invest in, depending on what region of the world you're located in. If you have made those investments, fantastic. Those are niches that you should identify and target. If you know that there's niches where you're picking up a lot of inbound traffic from like LinkedIn, organic search, the large language modules, YouTube videos, whatever it is, and you're picking up a lot of people from niches that you can't currently adequately market, sell, and service, those should also be mentioned in your identification and ideal client profile, because those should be listed as negatives, like a negative on your ICP, as exclusions. A great way to think of this is if you're setting up a LinkedIn ads campaign, or you're setting up saved searches in LinkedIn Sales Navigator, there's criteria that you can specifically include, and there's criteria that you can specifically exclude. If you're designing drop-down lists on a lead generation form, include all of those, because if someone picks an include niche that you specialize in, well, that sets off the alarms and notifications in your workflow automation and your marketing tech and your CRM. And you know, it's a perfect account that gets immediately forwarded to someone from your sales team for a human to look at it. Conversely, if they pick a drop down for that basically negative qualifies them, you do the opposite. You don't waste time nurturing and sending that person to sales. So there's a lot to be said for understanding those inclusions and exclusions and letting it drive your targeting strategy for ads and outbound, and your anti-targeting strategy and the drop-down lists and your top and bottom website navigation and your copywriting strategy. Definitely gets influenced by having a strong understanding of what the right industries and the wrong industries are, what the right geographic region, what the right company sizes are, what the wrong ones are. That's how I'd be thinking about identifying and targeting the niches. And then, like, messaging is a really big deal as well, because for a self-guided journey, a lot of people, when sales leadership, or especially when venture-backed boards are running the show, a lot of times there's this premature obsession with getting people to sales meetings as rapidly as possible. And a good way to think of that is, imagine that you or someone you know goes out on a first date. Maybe they meet someone on a dating app, or if it's a fix-up or matchmaker or something like that. And for whatever reason, the person that they meet is thinking that it would be a good idea to sometime during the first date that they should elope and get married. Sounds like a pretty funny romantic comedy movie, but not so funny if it's actually happening to you. Who in their right mind would think that it's a good idea to make a marriage commitment to someone that you met 15 minutes ago? It's the same kind of thing for a prospect, a potential client that's never heard of your company before, when you're obsessively focused on trying to get them to book a sales meeting with you. And if you do that too forcefully, you can really burn a lot of goodwill, burn your bridges very, very quickly. However, that same person, if you understand what's going on in their world, likely has a whole bunch of goals and a whole bunch of challenges that you could potentially really help them with in an educational context. So this is where premium content, webinars, podcasts, YouTube videos, email nurturing courses, academies, all of this can make an enormous difference with educating and building trust that leads to a natural outcome on the second or third or fourth date, that second or third or fourth touch point, where someone could reasonably raise their hand if they're ready to have some human interaction from your team, of like scheduling a needs assessment or a consultation or booking a tour or something like that. So this is what I'd be thinking about when it comes to identifying and target the right data center ecosystem niches, is really having a strong handle on that product market fit, on that go-to-market fit, on your basic unit economics, and showing up in a way where you're educating and building trust before you're pushing for bottom of the funnel sales interactions. You certainly want to make it easy for someone to raise their hand and talk to a human if they are, but increasingly we live in a world where the self-guided journey, the self-driven buyer's journey, is now the default journey that most people prefer. So with that in mind, a lot of education and trust building that used to happen like this in face-to-face conversations is now happening more in the context of professional development and learning and development. And the smartest companies in the data center ecosystem have figured this out. A lot have actually been already doing this for 10 years. Like, when I come across someone and I talk to them about this, and like, yeah, we know we need to fix it. Like, yeah, I think we'll get to that LinkedIn, that YouTube thing, that webinar thing. Maybe we'll get to it like next year or the year after. Like, dude, like, everyone that you're competing with has been doing this well for at least 8 or 10 years. And you're just going to start doing it next year. You're going to be invisible. You're going to be irrelevant. In a world that increasingly favors talking to a chat app over a human, sitting this one out really isn't a good idea if you care about the future of your career and you care about the future of your business. So this is what I'd be thinking about when it comes to identifying and targeting the right data center ecosystem niches, as repositioning your sales team, your client-facing team members to be seen a lot more like teachers, consultants, subject matter experts, trusted advisors, maybe even some of the more senior ones as thought leaders, because that's who your ideal prospects that you're looking to attract and engage with your ecosystem niches. This is essentially who they want to spend time with, compared to salespeople that they're more sales allergic than they've ever been in the past. So that's how I'd approach it, identifying and targeting the right data center ecosystem niches. Is take that mindset, the humility mindset, into that you don't know what you don't know. Everything is an experiment until you get that clarity. Oh, one more quick thing too, when it comes to product market fit and go to market fit. A lot of people mistakenly assume that once you've achieved that you're done. You are no more done with achieving product market fit than you are with going to the gym once. Know anyone that's had a good fitness outcome that went to the gym once? No. Product market fit is a snapshot point in time. You can for sure lose it over time as new impacts happen within the marketplace, as new competitors, new indirect competitors, new non-business model competitors appear, as platforms make adjustments, as buyer preferences change, as people turn over in companies, as companies merge, go through M&As, mergers and acquisitions. All of that can impact your ability to sustain product market fit. So do not fall into the trap of thinking that because you've achieved product market fit, that you have lifetime maintenance or a lifetime guarantee on that. No, it's actually way more likely that every 3 to 6 months, at minimum of every 12 months, your executive leadership, your head of product, your head of strategy should be sitting down and looking at your playbooks, looking at your ICP, your ideal client profile, looking at this and your unit economics, and figuring out, is this still valid or has it changed? And if it's changed, what do we need to do to adapt and correct? If you like baseball analogies, I realize disproportionately most of the people that are baseball fans are probably in the US, but there's professional baseball in Latin America and parts of Asia. If you like sports analogies, just understand, in a world that's guided by analytics, what in baseball is known as sabermetrics, statistics, basically data, teams are constantly studying the data and studying the video and trying to look for where they can throw, where they can pitch to, where they can hit into your weakness. Once your competitors understand your vulnerability and their vulnerability and they adjust, that changes your product market fit. It changes the market dynamics. And again, this is the reason why product market fit, none of this is set it and forget it. So when I see companies making the incredibly short-sighted decision of cutting headcount in some of these areas that are responsible for the future, the current and the immediate future direction of where this company is going, I wonder what the heck they're not thinking, because this isn't set and forget. This is understanding that the market dynamics are constantly changing. The pace of acceleration in data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities has never been as chaotic and crazy and frenetic as it's been in the last several months. So identifying and target the right ecosystem niches. If there's not someone or someones on your team that are constantly on a full-time basis figuring out what products and services you should be building, maintaining, and investing in and moving into next, and which you should be pivoting away from, there's a really, really good chance that you're going to stop being competitive at some point. But yeah, at the end of the day, this is part of the reason why go-to-market needs to be so much more integrated than it ever has been in the past. Marketers were working really closely with sales professionals, working really close with client success, account managers and product managers and channel partner managers and executive sponsors to make sure that you're all rowing the boat in the same direction. That you're all riding on the same bus, taking the flight to the same place, playing from the same musical sheet music, whatever analogy you prefer. But that's essential for identifying and targeting the right data center ecosystem niches, potatoes, whatever works best for you. But at the end of the day, recognize that segmentation, personalization in a hyper competitive world are what wins the game. really, really dialed into that client centricity. Walk a mile, walk a kilometer in their shoes early and often to identify and target the right data center ecosystem niches. Okay, now what do we got for our next question? We're going to go into data center operators now. Co-location, cool. How do co-location providers balance a real estate and IT services focus? How do co-location providers balance a real estate and IT services focus? Yeah, it's super interesting that this doesn't tend to happen all that often in other kinds of data center operator business models aside from co-location. And I think the reason why is with hyperscale, the unit economics are just so much more so much more attractive. There's just so much more money at stake compared to co-location that they're open to the idea that it's not an either or. They really need to do everything. And the same thing with wholesale data center developers. Edge is interesting. In order to succeed in Edge, the kinds of marketing and sales playbook is you have to be exceptionally good about segmenting and targeting and personalization. And modular data centers are a little different of a beast as well, because you're really not an operator. You're more like a construction kind of prefabricated manufacturing company. But yeah, this is the co-location providers struggling with, are we a real estate business or an IT services business? I've seen this be a central struggle for well over a decade. And I don't know that there's a magic answer on all of this. I think it comes down to your leadership team, what they want the company to actually be. Do they want the company to be real estate centric, or do they want the company to be a lot more like a managed services company? You can for sure be both. A lot of the big data center operators do a really good job in both areas because they're big enough that they can afford to staff up the right kinds of teams with deep expertise in both. But yeah, smaller companies, I see a lot really struggle with this. And where I know it comes, where I kind of see the symptoms of this, is you have salespeople that come from a commercial or industrial real estate background selling co-location that really aren't IT professionals or IT sales professionals by background. And what tends to happen is they're kind of selling the cabinet space like they're selling co-working for servers. So it's almost like last week they could have worked for a big co-working company like WeWork or Regus or something like that. And then now they decided that they're going to go sell racks and cabinets for a co-location operator. That's very different than a co-location operator that recruits someone away from having worked for 5 years in an account executive or account management role for a managed service provider. That's very familiar with the journey, the pre-sales and post-sales journey, and familiar with like the professional services automation and remote management and monitoring and all those key parts of being a successful managed service provider. And then the interesting challenge as well for that tends to come up with co-location operators when they're trying to figure out, are they at the core a real estate company or an IT company, is the one thing I always ask the owners and the leaders of this company is, the smaller they are, the more they want to apply the same kind of lens to their IT clients as a traditional managed service provider would. In other words, anything and everything having to do with IT, with one caveat: as long as those IT services can be delivered on the servers that are sitting in our data center. If it requires going out to a client site, that's usually where they have the demarcation line. And in some cases, I've seen the owners of these smaller, and again, that's the interesting part, is that when I've had most of these conversations about the companies that balance it really well, they're usually in a sweet spot of anywhere from like 10 to 200 employees, which explains the reason why a CEO or equivalent is having these conversations, because beyond that size, usually the CEO would have kicked this down to someone else on their executive team, or perhaps even at a lower level than that. But like, yeah, they're usually dividing the line between, if the services can be provided by their team members in one of their facilities, in one of their data centers, then they will provide that. If it requires going out on site to a client office to a home office, to a branch office, to a headquarters, yeah, they're usually leaving that to another company, a traditional MSP that may be a channel partner of theirs. If they want to own that relationship, it'll be a contractor, a subcontractor of theirs that they dispatch and own that. But yeah, a lot of don't want to take their staff out of the data center and have them spend all day in the car driving around from client site to another. So it usually is the demark on that. But I think especially the smaller companies recognize that there's a tremendous amount of value in being that single point of contact in anything and everything having to do with their digital infrastructure assets that are in that facility. That's why over time, you've seen so many data center operators, especially colo providers, become very, very pragmatic about investing in really two things that drives ecosystem integration better. One is their meet me room in terms of peering and carrier neutrality and the cross connects and being able to offer a lot of great carrier choice for them that drives down their costs and improves redundancy and value. And then the second part of that is, besides the meet me room, it's just having a really, really strong handle on how they integrate with being able to provide that total solution. And those two approaches there, I think, are integral to especially the company, the client that's going to tend to pick a smaller co-location operator as opposed to one of the larger co-location operators. I think you can tell a lot of this also by go into LinkedIn Sales Navigator, just go to their LinkedIn company page and click on the list of employees. And where this is easier to see it versus more difficult to see, this is a co-location operator that has, say, for example, a few dozen employees as opposed to hundreds of employees or thousands of employees. With a few hundred employees, it starts to become a little more complicated. With a few dozen, it usually becomes more pronounced. With a few dozen employees, it's very rare that you will see someone with the word real estate in their job title. You'll see dozens of people potentially with something IT related in their job title, but it's very rare that you'll see someone at a co-location operator with like 20, 30, 50 employees that has the word real estate in their title. Usually because at that size, like a COO or CFO, or just more likely an operations manager or finance manager or something like that, or the CEO is the one that has a contact with someone that's doing those kinds of functions on an outsourced basis. A real estate agent, a property manager, a landlord, something like that. They're not taking on multiple roles internally as full-time salaried team members or teams of people doing that. But yeah, there's for sure, there's a difference in mindset. I think what's going to force a lot of the issue as well is it used to be, as recently as 10 years ago, $5 or $10 million could build a small data center. Today, that doesn't get you a shovel in the ground. It's not just the density. It's not just the grid supplies. It's not just the community stakeholders that all have a lot more input on what's being done. It's become so much more complicated, which is why I often tell people a lot of the co-location clients and co-location business owners that I personally worked with in the 2010s are no longer in those businesses. Nearly all of them at this point sold out to bigger data center operators, regionals that wanted to become stronger regionals, nationals that wanted to acquire regionals to become stronger nationals. There's been an enormous amount of mergers and acquisition. And from like the type of initiatives that I'd work on with these clients, there was definitely a basis for doing that as well. Client acquisition costs are pretty significant, especially when it comes to being able to sell to large, small businesses and mid-market IT clients and have a strong point of differentiation. And it's a lot easier for a company with a bigger sales team, a bigger account management team, a bigger marketing team, just bigger pockets in general, to be able to build a stronger brand for both the hyper local marketing and even the long distance digital marketing. And of course, when it comes to how capital intensive these businesses have become, that also is a strong need for why these would tend to roll up over time. But yeah, in terms of balancing the real estate and IT services focus, like I think at the end of the day, most co-location operators that have outside investors, which is most of them because it's so capital intensive, it's very likely that one or more members of your board and even of your leadership team will come from a strong real estate background, either on the investment side, portfolio side, VC side, something where they did a lot of investing in digital infrastructure companies in the past, with a strong emphasis on thinking more like a portfolio kind of concept. And then there'll be people on your leadership team and people on your board that come from an IT background, where maybe they weren't necessarily running a data center operator, but they were like a CTO of a SaaS company or an IT executive of a financial services company, a financial services, a fintech or something like that is a big vertical for your company pursuing clients in your co-location data center. So I think a lot of how companies decide to address the split between a real estate mindset and IT services mindset is governed by how big that company is and whether they have the resources to truly be able to fire on all cylinders across the board in both of those areas. But I also think there's a lot of self-selection that happens depending on the nature of who's on your founding team, who's on your executive team, who's on your board of directors, and what unique backgrounds and biases they could potentially bring with them as well. From the glass half full department, I think a lot of it's leaning into strengths, as recognizing that this is a big area of focus, and it would be amazing to have the CTO of a mid-market SaaS company be on our board, or an IT executive for a big hospital system in our area if we're going to be going all in on trying to get health tech clients into our data center or something like that. So those are the different ways that I think you'd approach this. As obviously, as co-location operators scale considerably larger, real estate kind of morphs into its first cousin of REITs, real estate investment trusts, where in most cases they end up becoming publicly traded, or at least significant amounts of capital flowing into that. And that introduces not just a whole bunch of people on your LinkedIn company page with the word real estate in it, but it introduces a whole bunch of finance and governance requirements and reporting requirements as well, that again would be completely out of reach for a small company with a few dozen employees, but is extraordinarily important for a mid-size or enterprise data center operator that is publicly reporting earnings to stock exchanges and various regulatory boards, depending on where you're located, 4 times a year, like clockwork. These are the same companies that would have their executives being interviewed, at least in the US, on mainstream financial publications like CNBC and Bloomberg and Wall Street Journal and similar kinds of mainstream financial media outlets, which, by the way, is a lot of the reason why when you go to a family function this weekend and your brother-in-law, who doesn't know squat about the IT industry, is dropping some names of a tech company that he heard mentioned on CNBC Squawk Box or Jim Cramer or something like that. That's where that's coming from. And they have envy over why didn't they have perfect timing on NVIDIA or something like that. So that's just kind of the world that we live in, that a lot of these, it used to be 10 years ago that people that didn't work in our industry or that didn't work in IT had no idea what a data center is. For better or worse, now a lot more people know what data centers are. But if you ask them to look down at their phone and ask them, where do you think Facebook lives, or where do you think ChatGPT lives, or where do you think YouTube lives, and you get a blank stare, then it's a good opportunity to give them a little bit of an insider education on what actually goes on in co-location data centers and backbones and internet exchanges and peering and all that good stuff. So those are some of the things that I'd be thinking about for how a co-location provider balances a real estate and IT services focus. My personal perspective, I've spent nearly all of my career working in one way, shape, or form, 1 or 2 degrees away from IT services, from IT hardware, IT consulting, traditional client server software, SaaS, channel partnerships. It's all been directly related to IT services. In some of those contexts, I got to work with residential real estate on the marketing side and on the tech side. That's part of the reason I have less hair. Work with some people on the commercial and the industrial real estate. Definitely a much more long-term forward-thinking approach and client acquisition and account-based marketing and things like that. But yeah, it's a different kind of mindset. In a lot of ways, real estate has tended to lag in technology adoption and even some kind of branding on the B2B side. But there's definitely some companies in the data center industry that have done a fantastic job on content and thought leadership as well. It's just that they tend to be the biggest of the large global ones like CBRE and JLL and companies that are roughly at that size. But yeah, for like a small to mid-sized co-location operator, it's not easy. And a lot of what determines the split of how much attention you pay to real estate versus IT services is your resources and the company culture that comes from like who's leading the company, what their backgrounds were, what they did before they joined your company, the C-levels, the board of directors, and really what they want the focus to be. And are they trying to maximize the return by traditional real estate measures? Or are they trying to maximize the return by running it more like a managed service provider that happens to have co-location facilities? In a perfect world, they do a fantastic job of balancing both from a client perspective, from a channel partner perspective, from a potential employee perspective. Everyone's kind of got their own way of deciding what's best for them. But yeah, I think there's always going to be this dynamic. It's going to change over time. The capital requirements, the real estate requirements are really dramatically increasing in complexity as we move into a world where so much is driven by AI and high performance computing and GPUs and grid power shortages and alternate energy and dealing with community stakeholders and the public relations ramifications of dealing with community stakeholders and the capital requirements and public relations and investor relations. It's so much more complicated than it was 10 years ago, but there's also enormous career opportunities for those that can help figure those things out. But yeah, I would just, from the perspective of like a co-location provider, balancing that, there's the perspective of the leadership team, there's the perspective of a channel partner, there's the perspective of someone potentially that wants a potential employee, a potential client. Everyone has a different way of balancing what ultimately is best for them. But I think this push and pull, the two sides of the coin, the two poles of the tug of war, the rubber band, is going to continue for quite some time. And ultimately, you have to figure out what's best for your company with where you are and what you want your goals to be. So I don't think there's really a cut and dry answer as to which should win. In most cases, it's a delicate balancing act that's best left for your company's board of directors and CEOs to figure out when it comes to co-location providers balancing your real estate and IT services focus. If you're getting good value so far from what you've learned in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, be sure to hit the like button. And if you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you think we should address in an upcoming show, make sure to leave that in the comments on whatever platform that you're watching on. And by the way, if you're listening, be sure to also rate and review us. We'd love to know your feedback on what you've enjoyed from this, if you have suggestions on what we can do to continue to improve. And most of all, we'd love to know your context, what your company does and what you do for that particular company, and what brought you to wanting to listen or watch today's episode. So what's up next? What's our final question? This is a great one for marketers, marketing ops, sales enablement folks, even channel partner folks to a certain degree. How do we use data center buyer persona research to refine your go-to-market strategy? How do we use on a continual basis buyer persona research, data center buyer persona research to refine your go-to-market strategy? It's never been easier and it's never been more challenging at the same time to be able to knock it out of the park when it comes to having great customer insight research. So a buyer persona, just to make sure we're on the same page, is a representation of a representative stakeholder, an archetype, a document, typically one or more pages, that defines what you know about that particular person, customer insight research, based on some educated speculation and actual research. And I'd encourage you to spend most of your resources on actual research and not go overboard on speculation. A lot of times people guess, pulling things out of thin air based on conversations with one or two people in your company that have been there since Al Gore booted up the first AOL modem. But yeah, I would encourage you to think long and hard about getting as close as possible to original words, thoughts, goals, challenges in their own words. If you can do face-to-face interviews, fantastic. Video, phone interviews would be second best. After that, like call notes, gong recordings, CRM notes are all very valuable. Surveys early and often, always be surveying, always asking for feedback. And at the absolute minimum, for each of your segments, you can take those 10 or 20 people and go pull up their LinkedIn profiles and figure out what they have in common. What are the common goals that they are talking about in their about section and their summary section up at the top and in their headline? What do they mention when they describe their job in their current and previous jobs? And again, looking at 10 or 20 representative people, what are the commonalities on what they're working on that could earn them a promotion? What shows up in job descriptions that gives you strong insight as to what they need to achieve individually as a team and as a company that's directly and indirectly related to what you do? And what are they struggling with most? What they're struggling with most, you may not see directly on their LinkedIn profile, but if you look at content that they interact with, their comments, potentially groups that they belong to, reading through their posts, if they post on some kind of frequent basis, can often give you a lot of insights to that. And in a pre-LLM ChatGPT world, I used to also, and you can still do this, I'd encourage people to take first name, last name, job title at company for those 20 people and put it into a Google search and see what you find. Sometimes you find gold. And it's not that you're going to find a buyer persona, but you find like bylined articles that they've written for a trade publication, like in our case, maybe Data Center Knowledge or something like that, or on or Data Center Dynamics or Infrastructure Masons or something like that. Or maybe you find a recording sitting in YouTube of a panel that they were on, or a webinar that they were a guest speaker about, or a news release that they were quoted on. All of these, most importantly, give you insights in their own words, and getting those insights in their own words is incredibly, incredibly important for your buyer persona research, because it's what drives the magical impact in your go-to-market strategy of saying, okay, I know the goal that's coming up most often for this particular persona. I know the struggle, the challenge that's coming up most often. I need to get those into the headline of the website page for that persona. I need that to be the first title of the premium content lead generation offer that I build for that particular buyer persona. I need that to be the title of our breakfast seminar series, our lunch and learn series, our webinar series, whatever it is for that particular buyer persona. Again, using their words to grab them by the virtual shirt collar as they scroll by in an increasingly noisy world where so many thousands of entities are competing for their attention every single month. How do we stand out? It's relevancy. It's really understanding what's going on in their world, getting out of the vendor box, meeting them where they are, and making sure that we're speaking their language, not what we'd like that language to be, not what we'd like them to be buying from us, but meeting them where they are with what they know that they're dealing with right now, and us presenting potential resources that can help them achieve their goal, overcome this big challenge that's driving them nuts, based on how others in similar job functions and similar companies in a similar geographic region of a similar company size have addressed this very goal, this professional growth goal, or this big nagging challenge or struggle that is eating away at them. So when it comes to refining, that's the initial research. When it comes to the refinements, there's a couple of listening posts that I encourage you to think about when it comes to refining. One is the notion that you need to refine, that this isn't, we're going to create a buyer persona, put it in a museum case and come back to it in 5 years, not even remotely close. You're changing, your company is changing, their company is changing, their job role is changing, the industry for sure as heck is changing. So a minimum of every 12 months, you should be going back and refreshing this and making sure that those goals and those challenges and that narrative and everything and those insights are still as current as they need to be. But what else can you be doing to figure out these conversations? To the extent that your sales development reps, your account executives, your account managers are meeting with these folks, those call notes, those recordings in the CRM are gold. To the extent that these buyer personas are filling out forms on your website for lead generation content, like for, like downloading ebooks, registering for webinars, registering for events, having a simple free form question on there that asks them, like what we do at DCSMI, your biggest sales/marketing challenge. You'd be shocked by asking a couple thousand people a year that kind of question in each one of those segments, how much you can learn about that particular segment. Not to mention that you know exactly what that person is articulating their challenges. So for anyone that's like dealing with that person one-on-one, like as an AE or an SDR or an AM or something like that, or CSM, you know exactly what they're trying to achieve, exactly what they're struggling with. The other interesting use case with that from a buyer persona in between the individual and the buyer persona is the team alignment perspective. So for any of you that are into like account-based marketing, account-based selling, let's say you have 8 people or 14 people or whatever it is that have completed a form for a piece of premium content on your website, and they're all coworkers of each other. They all work with each other in the same department or the same organization. What can you learn by looking at the similarities and the differences in their write-in values and how they articulated that big challenge? And obviously, I'm using sales and marketing in this example, but it's very, very easy to substitute what's relevant for your particular business model, whether it's liquid cooling, whether it's co-location, whether it's physical security, whether it's digital infrastructure, whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's decommissioning. Ask them in their own words what they're struggling with most, and take the consensus on that as a moving target way for you to evaluate to make sure that you still understand what's going on in their world. And again, every time they fill out a form, ask them. Another great way to get that data is polls. Whether you're doing polls on your LinkedIn profile, whether you're doing polls or surveys tied to like a webinar event, like a lot of people use polls at virtual events and in-person events, and they certainly use surveys following events. So that's another way to be able to capture that information on a regular basis. And then there's also a lot of marketers that use social listening tools to be able to follow LinkedIn, Twitter, X conversations with people that are in your target accounts and see what they're talking about and how they're expressing their own words. And again, it's all of the above in most cases to really refine that strategy on a regular basis. I think the biggest leap forward for a lot of people isn't just committing to doing this and recognizing that it's not one and done, but it's getting a lot more precise about how you define your buyer personas, and a lot more precise about how you deal with segmentation and personalization than you've ever done in the past. And the reason that that's so important is people's access, that immediate gratification, access to information. The challenge is the exclusivity that a lot of salespeople used to have as the gatekeeper of information has completely left the building. There's no notion whatsoever that you have a monopoly on information anymore. You didn't really have it 10 years ago either, but you were still competing against like mobile devices, search engine adoption, YouTube, LinkedIn, attending webinars, going to review websites, social proof, user-generated content. That was like 10 years ago. And then you add like the self-service marketplaces into the equation. That's another competitive threat. But like the last 2 or 3 years, the large language models, the chat apps, ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, Perplexity, Grok, like all of that, it's giving your prospects and clients immediate gratification, instant answers to any question they would want to know on the planet. And they don't have to click through to 10 blue links anymore and figure out how all these things are synthesized. They just press the microphone and talk. And seconds later, it's read back to them, immediate gratification. This is why we see among friends and family members, there's people half joking, half serious, that they know that they have a friend or family member that's in a relationship with their chat app, and a relationship that rivals the kind of intimate relationship that they may have with a significant other, with a boyfriend, girlfriend, with a spouse. You're like, holy smokes. There's people that are talking about that in a generation, our kids or grandkids could be marrying an AI spouse. So this is kind of, the weird part is the better the models get and the more incredibly valuable they are, the harder it is for you to earn your way in edgewise. This is why I've been talking about for the better part of a year, like turning over the whole go-to-market playbook to be all about educating and trust building, to get in early and often in a professional development and learning and development context. I don't know why 95% of this industry hasn't immediately started divesting away from dinosaur marketing and moved 100% or 90% into like academies and customer education, educating and building trust with their ideal clients, with their perfect buyer personas, with their target account list. It's like the loss factor on these national and global conferences where there's a severe ICP, a severe ideal client profile mismatch is like off the charts in many contexts. Like, okay, you take the conference's demographics of who was there last year, who's going to be there this year, put that on the left-hand side of your screen, put your ideal client profile and your prioritized buyer personas on the right-hand side of the screen, and give like an objective match of like a letter grade or percentage or something like that. Try to figure out of who is going to be at that conference, how well it matches with your ideal client profile and your prioritized buyer personas. If it's mostly the same people, great. That's a good match. Like 75, 80% of the attendees line up with who you exactly would want to be talking to. That's a good match. Then the next part of that is knowing that at a typical conference, only about 3% of the people that are attending that conference get to educate and build trust. They're doing that from the stage. So like 2,500 people at the conference, 75 speakers, that's 3%. They'll bring along a couple coworkers with them. So it's maybe between speakers and their coworkers, 250 of the 2,500 people at the conference, 10%. Another 10% are trying to buy their way in with booths and sponsorships with debatable success. And the other 80%, you're just the product. You're the captive audience. No one's buying the booth or speaking at the conference if you're not there. So if you're going to rival what you could do with your own events to knock it out of the park with your buyer personas, you need to put yourself in environments where like 75, 80%, at least a 75, 80% match on the demographics. And you or someone from your team is on stage educating and building trust, which is when you start to realize that, like, what? We're doing either of those. So what are we doing? I call it Oprah Winfrey syndrome. What is Oprah Winfrey syndrome? You get President's Club, and 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 everyone gets an all expense paid vacation to Cannes or Bali or Hawaii or Vegas. Sounds like a blast. Yes, there's some learning. There's some networking going. Some of that networking is 10, 20% of the people that are using their expense account to go hunt for their next job. How's the ROI on that? Great for the person, sucks for your company, right? So like when it comes to understanding your buyer personas and educating and building trust and refining your go-to-market strategy, I don't see very many gray areas. The gray area to me is there's a good persona match with the conference's demographics and you're on stage. Without that, I'd look to fire the bottom 20% of your conferences and fund having an amazing breakfast seminar, lunch and learn program, after hours professional development program, webinar series that is very, very, very specifically targeted on your high value, high economic value ideal client profile and your prioritized buyer personas, and educating and building trust with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context, so that your most important buyer personas, so your client-facing team members, are some of the smartest, helpful, nicest people on the planet when it comes to anything and everything having to do with your category. The conferences, the vanity metrics are messing a lot of people up. They're thinking there needs to be thousands of people in the room or hundreds of the people in the room to matter. If your conference room has 20 chairs and 90% of those chairs are filled up with people from IT or engineering roles or whatever your core buyer persona is for your target accounts, magical things will happen when you're teaching them valuable skills, valuable professional development and learning development that helps them do their job better. The right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context, so we can get your account executives, your account managers, your marketers, your SDRs, your BDRs out of the vendor box and help them stay out of the vendor box, because instead they're being seen more like teachers, consultants, trusted advisors, subject matter experts, and maybe even thought leaders. Do this early, do this often, and most of all, what your CFO and your board of directors are going to totally love is compared to the cost of air travel, expensive hotels, expensive wining and dining, conference attendees, conference booths, and all of the above, you already have access to the conference room or the classroom in your facility for free, right? You already have a CRM and an email marketing program where you can email out invitations. You already have a LinkedIn company page where you can invite people to an in-person or virtual event. So what is your actual cost besides time? It's a breakfast event. Yep. Bring in some bagels and cream cheese and some fresh fruit and some coffee. Sounds like a couple $100 or your local currency equivalent for 15, 20 people, right? Same thing for lunch. Pizza, salads, sandwiches, whatever works best for you. Again, 15, 20 people, a few $100s. No no $8 cups of coffee required. No full week the week before and full week the week after getting ready. And you know what I love about hosting your own events as well? For years, we've gotten in this culture where there's a whole separate ecosystem being created to compensate for the fact that there's not good gender balance at conferences and throughout the industry. You know, one of the coolest parts about having your own events, in-person events and virtual events, they don't have to have a 50% travel requirement. And you know what happens when the 50% travel requirement or any travel requirement drops? Because all of the events are hosted in your company's own classroom and on your Zoom account, on your webinar account, and don't require overnight stays, is you open yourself up to a workforce that right now is being chased out of the workforce because it's not practical for parents of young children and caregivers, whether it's children or elder care, whatever it is, to be able to have a job with a 25 or 50% travel requirement. So for people that are trying to get back to gender equality and balancing all of this in the industry, that's another side benefit as well. And obviously, it's great for the environment relative to everything else that goes into the sustainability drawbacks of huge national conferences. But yeah, for sure, owned events, over-indexing on fantastic professional development and learning and development for your professional buyer context. You don't need to have people that have a travel requirement. You could have someone literally with no travel requirement. If your core buyer personas are located within a 30 or 60-minute drive of your facility, and their primary goal is twice a month to fill that conference room up with 15 or 20 perfect people from your target accounts. And the other 2 weeks, do the exact same thing, but run that virtually. Much wider labor pool. Certainly much better unit economics that your CFO and your board will freaking love relative to what they're currently investing now in some of these national and global conferences where there's an enormous loss factor relative to your ICP and your core buyer personas. And even if it were a perfect match, only 3% of the people are getting on stage to actually educate and build trust. Perfect people in your conference room, 45 minutes to an hour, 12 times a year, magical things will happen when you teach them valuable skills and frameworks and methodologies and best practices that you share internally. You all of a sudden decide to come up with a public-facing version of this as well. Every high-value buyer persona segment where the client's worth at least $100,000 or your local currency equivalent should be going all in on this. If you have a channel partner program and you're not doing this, boy, are you missing the boat. This is the playbook. It has a lot of moving parts. Of course, the first couple times you do this, that there's some learning curve to get good at operationalizing all of this. But in terms of financial cost, minuscule compared to the alternatives. In terms of effectiveness, like night and day to help you educate and build trust. And if you ever saw the movie Moneyball, but there's a scene towards the beginning of the movie where Jonah Hill and Brad Pitt are in the parking garage. Medieval thinking. People in the data center industry are thinking like dinosaurs, asking all the wrong questions. They're thinking in terms of buying eyeballs, buying attention. But you're selling to really technical, really cynical, really sales allergic IT professionals and engineers. And they see through all of this nonsense. So instead of buying attention and trying to manipulate them and to take a meeting, give them what they really need: education and best practices that can help them do their job better, learning from their peers how others in similar job functions and similar companies in their geographic region of similar company sizes have achieved these same professional development goals, have overcome some of these exact same challenges. Do this early, do this often, educate and build trust. That's the cornerstone. That is the single most important mindset to think about when it comes to using data center buyer persona research to refine your go-to-market strategy. Nearly everyone who would ask that question, my vote is, should be turning over their whole go-to-market strategy to be aggressively moving away from expensive paid events into hosting your own events. This isn't something that's newfangled, that's speculative as to whether it will actually work. I've been literally doing this my entire career from the pre-internet days when part of the promotional efforts were run on a fax machine as opposed to email and LinkedIn event invites. So yeah, it's like, this has been around forever. Your buyers are craving authentic educational events, experiences where they can learn from their peers to help them do their job better. What they're not craving is someone from your sales team showing up and reading the website to them. They don't need someone to read the slides to them. What they're craving is learning from experts and learning from peers. The better job you do with early and often, the better job you do with educating and building trust with these core buyer personas, the more the know, like, and trust and meeting the rest of the decision committee and influencing the decision committee becomes a very, very natural and incredibly valuable outcome. And when you do this well, you will starve the oxygen supply away from competitive alternatives, because multiple people from that company see your client-facing team members and this event as the go-to resource for learning what they need to do to take their team, to take their company to the next level when it comes to everything that you stand for in your category. That's how I would approach using data center buyer persona research to refine your go-to market strategy. If you've been enjoying this week's Data Center Go-to-Market podcast, hosted Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, be sure to hit the like button to help spread the word. If you have an idea for a topic or a question or challenge that you think we should address in an upcoming show, an upcoming episode, be sure to drop that in the comments, and we will add that to the consideration queue of topics to address in an upcoming show. I'm Joshua Feinberg, host of the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show and founder of the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. And if you and I are not currently connected on LinkedIn and you'd like to be sure to mention in the note that goes along with the invitation that you have watched Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show and that you're a fan of the show. I'd be happy to accept your connection invite on LinkedIn. Oh, and with one of my other roles, I also host the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. If you or someone on your team would make a fantastic guest to interview on an upcoming episode, be sure to reach out to me as well. We're always looking for new fascinating guests to interview throughout the global data center ecosystem. And most of all, if you want to be notified about upcoming educational events and resources like this, be sure to subscribe to our Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter. You can subscribe for free directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. Comes to your email inbox each Sunday. So glad that you're able to join us for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. We wish you great success in growing your impact, your team's impact, and your company's impact throughout the global data center, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure ecosystem. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a great rest of your week, and look forward to seeing you back next time. Take care now.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales marketing and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com.